Good morning, everyone, and other greetings to those who are joining us online from different parts of the world. I know we have some of our speakers, chairs, and audience members who are joining over Zoom. So, greetings to everyone. Welcome to the conference, Chronicling Unrealized Trajectories, the Plurality of Historical Experiences in 1940s South Asia. The conference being jointly hosted by the Lakshmi, Mittal and Family South Asia Institute at Harvard University and Max Weber Forum. I'm Monica Setia. I head the India operations for the Lakshmi, Mittal and Family South Asia Institute. I'm just going to keep it very crisp, the name Mittal Institute. So just be reminded, when I say Mittal Institute, I mean the Lakshmi Mittal and Family South Asia Institute at Harvard University. Very happy to be opening the conference today that's been chaired by Professor Sugato Bose, Gardiner Professor of Oceanic History and Affairs at Harvard University. The conference being convened by Robert Rahman Raman, India Fellow at the Mittal Institute. The conference also marks culmination of Robert's one-year fellowship with the Mittal Institute, during which he was mentored by Professor Bose. Thank you so much, Shugato, for your mentoring and for coming all the way from Boston to chair the conference. A few notes regarding the conference today. We'll begin with our inaugural address now, that will be followed by 3 panel discussions, interspersed with tea and lunch. Finally, we'll have a vote of thanks. We'll try to keep it crisp, not have you stay too long in the room. So we'll try to wrap it up just before 4. Hopefully, the panel discussions all wrap up in time. Each panel has built-in audience Q&A, so you all will have chance to ask questions. For the audience who are joining us from Zoom, please post your questions in the Q&A box. One of our team members will read out the questions to the chair of the panel. We'll take up your questions. We have water available right outside the room. Some of the bottles are around here, but help yourself outside. The washrooms are also, once you get out of the door, go to your right, and the washrooms are there. I also request everyone to please put their phones in a switch-off mode or silent mode so that nobody is bothered during the conference as they speak. I'll just take a first few quick minutes to introduce the Mittal Institute for those of you who might be joining us for the first time and may not be aware about the Institute. We are a South Asia Institute, like I mentioned, engaged in integrative research, advancing and deepening the understanding about the critical issues that are relevant in South Asia, bringing Harvard closer to the region. Harvard University formally recognized the Institute as an academic initiative in 2013. Our work spans across South Asia. A special mention here that Professor Bose actually was the founding faculty director of the Institute. Thank you, Professor Bose, again for this initiative. We work closely with all the faculty members, researchers, and students at Harvard and the in-region institutions and scholars like all of you, disseminating knowledge, building capacity, informing policy through scholarly exchanges and fellowships. I mentioned about the India Fellowship, of which Robert was a beneficiary. All of you, if you are at that stage, you're welcome to apply. We also have other kinds of fellowships right now that are open, that take you to Cambridge, Boston at Harvard campus. So in case you're interested, follow our social media and you'll know more about those fellowships. We do sponsor lectures, organize conferences like the one today, both in region and on Harvard campus, trying to bring in knowledge from both South Asia to Harvard and vice versa through research grants, and then build a community of stakeholders like all of you. Thank you for joining us, and I'll end my brief intro of Mittal Institute right here. We are very thankful to Max Weber Forum for joining hands with us for their support, their collaboration for the conference. Thank you so much, Sebastian, again, and also for coming in today. Now, a brief introduction of our inaugural speakers. We have Professor Sugato Bose, Gardiner Professor of Oceanic History and Affairs, Harvard University. He served as the Director of Graduate Studies in History at Harvard and also the founding director of Harvard South Asia Institute, like I mentioned earlier. Professor Bose was educated at Presidency College in Kolkata and the University of Cambridge, where he obtained his PhD. His scholarship has contributed to a deeper understanding of colonial and post-colonial political economy, relation between rural and urban domains, interregional arenas of travel, trade, and imagination across the Indian Ocean, and Indian ethical discourses, political philosophy, and economic thought. He's also mentor to Robert during his India Fellowship, like I mentioned earlier. We also have with us Sebastian Schwecke, head of Max Weber Forum for South Asian Studies. Sebastian Schwecke earned his PhD in political science from Leipzig University in 2010, focusing on the political economy of Hindu nationalist and Islamist movements. At the Center for Modern Indian Studies in Göttingen, he developed a research agenda blending social and economic history with economic anthropology. Before joining Max Weber Foundation, he was an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata. His research interests include markets, credit, debt, speculation, extra-legality, uncertainty, trust, and labor. Thank you again, Shugato and Sebastian, for doing the inaugural. And special thanks to Shugato for joining us all the way from Boston. I pass on the mic to you to take forward the inaugural and then the chairing of the conference. Thank you.
So let me briefly move here. I won't keep you very long today. Basically, I'm here to give you all a very warm welcome. I'm very happy that you came to this event, basically. And let me briefly say a very few words on the 1940s, the mid-20th century, basically, which I think from a social history point of view is still being overlooked to some extent in the discourse, because some of the developments taking place at that point of time are actually still having a massive impact. Now, I'm a historian of capital. Capital is what I don't see on this program today, so that's why I'm bringing it up. So capital actually has a major trajectory in the mid-20th century. It's not necessarily only the 1940s, but it's a very apt topic for this conference to quite some extent, because there are quite a number of unrealized trajectories that are happening there that lead to a mixture in the development of Indian capital, basically, where you have the business house as a conglomerate that mixes the family firm and the corporate form, and that relies on the state and cannot accumulate capital without it, but at the same point of time has to sort of force the state to actually prepare the ground for that. And all these kind of things are actually very much things that are happening in the period from the 1940s to the late 1960s. So it's actually bank nationalization in 1969 that actually is the end point here, where the system becomes something that's stable. And before that, there's quite a lot of fluidity. So there's a long 1940s, in this case, a very long 1940s in the history of capital as well. And maybe especially when we're talking about labor, which I think is a major topic in the conference, this history of capital is something that has to be thought alongside. There is no way that labor can be thought without capital. So I will leave the introduction to Shugotaji, and because he has much more to say on the topic of the conference. And well, I welcome you all. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for your introductory remarks. And let me at the outset thank the Max Weber Stiftung, especially the Max Weber Forum for South Asian Studies that you head, for supporting this conference on 1940s South Asia. Since you have mentioned the importance of looking at capital, let me just say that many, many years ago, I had organized a conference in 1986 titled South Asia and World Capitalism. And the proceedings of that volume came out from Oxford University Press in 1990. I believe the book is not in print anymore, but those of you who are interested should be able to find it in your libraries. There were many important contributors, including Emanuel Wallerstein, and also some of the leading historians of South Asia of that period, including K.N. Chaudhary, Christopher Bailey, David Washbrook, David Ludden, and many others. Now, As Monica mentioned, and we really need to thank her and her team for bringing us all together, I was asked to become director of the South Asia Initiative, as it was then called, way back in 2002. And we had a big inaugural conference in the fall of 2003 at Harvard. And what we emphasized in that period from about 2003 and 2010 was to place South Asia in a larger connective global context. We used to have a conversation series in those years, which we had titled South Asia Without Borders. And practically everyone who was anyone in the field of South Asian studies, broadly defined, came to speak at Harvard in those years. Now, the main credit for conceptualizing and organizing today's conference goes to Robert Raman, who has just spent a year as India Fellow at the Mittal Institute's office here in Delhi. And I must say that, I have a large cohort of PhD students whom I supervise, and you'll be hearing from one of them very shortly. But whenever we are able to recruit talented, promising postdoctoral fellows from South Asia, I get an invitation to serve as their mentor, especially if they have anything to do with the history or the qualitative social sciences. And that has been a real joy for me. And it enables me to interact with a new rising generation of scholars of South Asia. Now, Robert suggested that we should choose this theme of, chronicling unrealized trajectories, the plurality of historical experience in 1940s South Asia. And I think it's a very good practice to have a postdoctoral fellows organize a workshop or a conference at the end of their term here. Now, on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of South Asian independence and partition, we had organized a set of two conferences in October 2022 and April 2023 at Harvard and Tufts, under the auspices of the Harvard Asia Center, the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, and also the Tufts Center for South Asian and Indian Ocean Studies. What we felt was that there were many creative ideas about what the Indian Union should look like that lost out in the final battle for state power in 1947. And we believed that we should not be looking at independence and partition as it came about in 1947 as a telos. So the idea in those sets of conferences was to excavate political and economic ideas that were valuable in their own right, but which remained unrealized at the moment of formal political decolonization. And we were doing this not simply out of academic interest in the history of that era, but we felt that those ideas seemed to have acquired renewed salience in the 21st century. Partition may in fact be seen as a failure of federation, or the failure to somehow realize some of the more innovative ideas of anti-colonial federalism that had been circulating across India in the first few decades of the 20th century. But the story does not end with a history of ideas. Even if we actually look at the anti-colonial politics of that period, we will likely find that there was a very strong element of historical contingency in 1947, which resulted in a particular kind and form of decolonization. Now, returning to the theme of capital, which Sebastian raised, the Indian National Congress had formed a national planning committee in 1938, and it included representatives of the industrial capitalist class. It included representatives of labor, and even though Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose were inclined towards socialist reconstruction of economy and society and independent India, Bose was generous enough to include J.C. Kumarappa, who was a Gandhian purist and did not believe in large-scale industrialization, on the National Planning Committee. There were scientists of note. Meghnad Shah played a very important role in planning for the future. And among the talented people whom Subhash Bose had recruited to work on the National Planning Committee was the economist K.T. Shah, who had been head of the economics department of the University of Bombay, wrote very important books on the Indian economy and polity in the interwar period. And people seem to have forgotten that he was, in fact, the opposition's candidate for president, but which, of course, he lost to the Congress candidate, Rajendra Prasad. I think there is room to further discuss what happened with the coming of independence. There were those who had worked in the National Planning Committee, like Meghnad Shah and K.T. Shah, who felt that there was too much of an interest in drawing on elements of the Bombay Plan of 1944, which had been drawn up by the capitalists of that era, or in fact, the plans drawn up by the colonial development and planning department that had been set up in 1944, rather than picking up on some of the ideas that had been floated by the National Planning Committee. And there were, I think, vigorous and healthy debates in the immediate post-independence period on what kind of economic trajectory India should take. I should also mention that, historians have long emphasized and studied some of the major mass movements of that era. They also need to be looked at in new light. The Quit India movement, called by none other than Mahatma Gandhi in August 1942, the Indian National Army of 1943 to 1945. But there were also important labor movements in which many of the younger scholars who will speak today are interested. And one of the things that I suggested to Robert when he proposed this idea to me is that we ought to place our study of South Asia in a broader comparative and connective Asian context, and which is why we thought it would be important to have contributions on, say, labor movements that took place involving the Indian diaspora in Southeast Asia. Now, last night, I gave the keynote speech at the curtain raiser for the IIC festival that is taking place over the next few days. And I have been asked to speak on art and music in the history of Indian anti-colonial nationalism. Now, there were important cultural dimensions to the Indian nationalist movement, and my main argument yesterday was that there was a kind of colorful cosmopolitanism. The best kind of patriotism of that era was not inward-looking. It was, prepared to engage with diverse sources of ideas. There was no necessary contradiction between cosmopolitanism and patriotism. And this is something that I tried to illustrate by giving examples of art and music. Even if you think of the iconic image of the nation as mother by Abanindranath Tagore, painted in 1905, he was influenced by Yokoyama Taikan, from whom he learned the Japanese wash technique. So the iconic Swadeshi image of the nation as mother was not bereft of a Videshi touch. If you think about music, one of the key characters in my lecture last evening was Dilip Kumar Roy, who was one of the greatest vocalists of the 20th century that India had produced. When he went to Cambridge, his friend Subhash Chandra Bose read philosophy. He studied mathematics, but also music. Mathematics and music are very sort of closely connected. And I showed how his father, Vijendralal Roy, who wrote a famous song, Dhanodhanno Pushpo Bhara, and many other patriotic songs, had been influenced by European music. He adapted and adopted straight notes from European music. And when conservatives criticized him, Rabindranath Tagore came to his rescue and support, saying that if in fact Vijendralal is awakening Indian music, including patriotic music, with the touch of a European wand, then Saraswati will bless him. And since there are representatives, students and scholars of the University of Göttingen, including Sebastian here, I might mention that when Dilip Kumar Roy went as a cultural ambassador to Japan, the United States, Europe, he went to Germany in 1953 and he performed the song Dhanodhanno Pushpo Bhara, and apparently he just mesmerized the audience. He sang it in Bengali, he sang it in Sanskrit translation, he also sang it in German, in a translation made by Professor Glassenapp of the University of Göttingen. So there was much that was going on in the cultural sphere, in the climactic phase of India's anti-colonial nationalist movement, and in the early years of India's independence. And also, when Subhash Chandra Bose chose Jana Gana Mana Adhinayaka Jai He as India's national anthem, it was first given orchestration and played as a national anthem by the Hamburg Radio Orchestra on the 11th of September of 1942. And I showed an image of that event where Subhash Chandra Bose is speaking, and he spoke about Goethe and Schlegel and Rückert and Deussen, but also referred to Tagore's visit to Germany in 1926. But as he's speaking, he's surrounded by the orchestra, which had played Jana Gana Mana as the national anthem, and that recording exists. But if somebody at the University of Göttingen can find a recording of Dilip Kumar Roy's concert there in 1953, that would be a marvelous find. So these are just some of the sort of introductory remarks, and I invite you all to take part in the discussion that will take place after the presentation of the papers. So I will pause here for the moment and then bring in the speakers on our first panel as seamlessly as possible. The first speaker is joining us from faraway California on Zoom, so I hope he is ready. So welcome to all of you again. Thanks again to the Max Weber Forum for South Asian Studies and to Monica and Robert for gathering us all here this morning. Thank you. So the first speaker on this panel is Aniket De. He is Assistant Professor of Modern South Asian and Indian Ocean History at the University of California in San Diego. He was an undergraduate at Tufts University, and then he came to us at Harvard University, where he did his PhD under my supervision. And he defended an outstanding thesis on imperial and anti-colonial lineages of federalism in South Asia last spring. He is the author of a book titled The Boundary of Laughter. It is about the Gombhira performative tradition in northern Bengal, and it straddles today the India-Bangladesh border between Malda and Rajshahi. If you haven't yet seen it, I would strongly recommend that book, which is a fascinating insight into how this performative tradition changed and yet did not change from the Swadeshi era onwards through the period of the Depression, the 1940s, the Partition, and continued a fascinating afterlife in the post-independence period. Today, he will be speaking about the vernacular aspects of the INA trials. So, Aniket, I hope you're ready to go in California, and we are ready here, eagerly awaiting to listen to you.
Thank you, Professor Bose. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Is my screen up? The PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see the screen. Perhaps we should dim the light a little bit to be able to read the PowerPoint clearly. This is much better. Beyond the courtroom, it says. Yeah.
Also, if you can make it full screen, that will be helpful.
I will make it full screen.
But we should be able to see him as well, right? Okay, let's see.
Do I go from slideshow and from here?
Yes. If you just press F5, that should be fine.
Oh, is this okay?
Yes.
Oh, this is much better. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
Thank you, Professor Bose. Thank you, Robert, for inviting me. I apologize for not being able to be in person and missing this very stimulating gathering. It is a fascinating topic and a fascinating moment in history to contemplate on. And my presentation today does not, aspire to cover all aspects of the INA trial. In fact, very few. I should begin with the disclaimer that I am not a specialist of the INA trials. Neither am I a legal historian in the more conventional sense of the term. But I am a cultural and political historian of anti-colonialism, and it's to that perspective that I want to approach some of the archives here. I'm in very early stages of this work, and I would very much benefit from discussion. So by all means, jump in with your thoughts. I think to this audience, I don't need to, typically to an American audience, I would start from the scratch about who was Subhash Chandra Bose and so on. But to this audience, I think I can rely on having the basic facts that of the historiography, but still to very quickly recapitulate some basic facts, is that the trial of the Indian National Army took place from November 45 to actually February 46, not December. That's a typo. February 46 in the Red Fort in Delhi. There were the three main people tried, three main generals were Gurbakh Singh Dhillon, Shah Nawaz Khan, and Prem Kumar Sehgal. This was after, as you know, the Second World War ended in 45, August 1945. So this is right in the aftermath of that. The main charge was brought was that of sedition, of waging war against king and country, and a few more charges of torture and war crimes and so on. These aspects actually have been studied in much depth. I have cited Miti Mukherjee has an article from 2019 where she goes into the specific charges and the legal aspects of it. The defense was put up by the Indian National Congress, which came to the defense of this group of leaders. Nehru famously came in, but I also want to highlight the key argument was made by Bhulabhai Desai, who was really the face of the defense and made several compelling arguments on the right to wage war. In fact, this was his argument, that that the Azad Hind Fauj was not really a seditious group within the army. It represented a sovereign government of India. So what was at stake was sovereignty. And this was a war between two sovereign bodies. This is the argument he made, and scholars of international law have since picked up on this. But much more than that, and that argument didn't go very much, legally speaking, within the courtroom. The military judges did not buy into it very much. They still sentenced them. But this was the first time ever, the stories of Subhash Chandra Bose and the Indian National Army first really come out into the public. From the social perspective, that is the most important thing about this trial. Before this, there was wartime censorship, and nobody quite knew that anything like the Azad Hind Fauj existed beyond very brief details. Bhulabhai Desai himself, actually, in a conversation to Dilip Kumar Roy, whom Professor Bose mentioned, actually said how it was he himself got to know about this story while going through the trial. And of course, the sentence was overridden after mass popular protests. This was all the more significant because the three generals, Dhillon, Khan, and Sehgal, were from the three major religious communities, Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh. And the protests were really cross-community, India-wide, especially Bengal, but also in very much in Punjab. And it was such an important moment that in a rare instance, the British actually overturned the sentence and let them go. And this was all the more significant looking back, it appears to us, that just before the nightmare of partition, which started from late 1946. This is why I'm embarrassed about typo. There's a big difference between February 46 and December 46 in that regard. By the end of the year, such a thing seemed almost extraordinary. This, in short, as we know, is the history of the INA trial. This is the narrative. What I wanted to point out in this talk is there are a couple of things I want to think with. Let's argue in the sense of formally argue, but ponder together. One is the relationship between the courtroom and the legal argument and what's happening in the popular sphere. In general, this is thought of as two very distinct domains. Much of legal history in South Asia still relies on judicial archives, which are at the end of the day colonial archives, and things like petitions, things like cases made, what was actually spoken. And it is often thought that the real public protest came after the judgment. This is an assumption that the protests came later, and it was the public was involved really from a point of hurt of these people being sentenced without being actually involved. in the legal process at all. I want to complicate this a little bit because I think a closer look at some of the archives, which I have only started to do, there is a lot more to do, actually reveals a lot more. It reveals a much deeper involvement of people, a much more ingrained history of anti-colonialism from very early on. This is why I will focus on the very beginning of this process. In November 45, the trials began on 5th of November, 1945, and look at some responses on what's going on there. Some of the themes to think of today is the role of space. And I will go on. This is an abiding interest of mine to understand the relationship between space and popular consciousness. I think something very interesting is going on vis-a-vis space, which is to say the Red Fort in this case. The contending and what I call converging spaces of courtroom and the street. Why I call converging, I'll get to in a moment. And finally, think about an anti-colonial legal history beyond judicial archives in this context together. This is the barracks where the INA trials were held, recently refurbished and redone inside the Red Fort. I took a picture. I took this picture in December 2021. This is how the barracks look. And there's a new museum inside with some of this narrative. What's quite interesting is this is what you see when you enter the Red Fort from the Lahore Gate or the other side, and you see this. But the moment you look from the other side, you see this kind of a landscape. This is, of course, the Mughal garden just beyond. This, and to the extent from the balconies of where the trial was held, you could see the Mughal structures all around. This might be apparently insignificant, but it was not to observers at the time. If you look at the Red Fort as a structure, this picture I took from the top of the Jama Masjid, just across. This will be familiar to most of you in Delhi. It is clear that, it is not very visible, but you can see that long line of white colonial barracks running right through the Red Fort. That's a very clear, legacy of the Great Rebellion of 1857. And this was clear that the space of the Red Fort, the Mughal space as it existed as a space of sovereignty, was very clearly violated during this period. And the clear architectural break of this was there. As a result, it is not, unclear that people were thinking that the fact of a Red Fort trial being held was of some significance. So on 6th of November, the editorial of a Bengali newspaper, Dugantor, had a title called Lal Killa, which said, "This was the site of the trial of Bahadur Shah, the last emperor of Delhi. It was the trial after the Great Rebellion of 1857 that ended the Mughal Empire and inaugurated the British Crown." Quote, "And then today, as the courtroom for the officers of the Indian National Army, this fortress is waiting for the possibilities of a new history to be made." This was even before the trial had formally started. And to compare this is coming from a Bengali newspaper. I have put the Hindustan Standard, which is a different, also a Calcutta newspaper, but in English. It is often Hindustan Standard and Anandabajar Patrika in Bengali would carry the same news, but in two languages. But compare this with the Times of India, which is covering the same area, which is describing what is going on in this period, in this space. It's talking about a double-storied, roughly built, gray and stone structure. The block stands near the southern end of the fort. A wing in the ground floor is allotted as the press room. Directly above it on the top floor is the hall in which the court will sit. It is a high-ceiling rectangular hall, 60 by 25 feet, with a side veranda running on three sides of it. This hall would be divided into segments and roped enclosures, and so on and so forth. You can see the level of, matter of fact speak and bland description of the space, which is very much at odds with how the Red Fort was seen. At this point, the English press, the British run press, like the Times of India, still wrote INA with quotation marks. It was meant to be a brisk, mundane court-martial, three soldiers accused of a mutiny, a routine affair in the warriors, an open and shut case. This would be this. So this was for them the usual trajectory that was going to happen, and not the other way around. This even so this connection between the two trials, of course, the first trial referred to was that of Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor. The first major account, in fact, still to this day, the most important transcript of this trial comes from Moti Ram, who titled his book Two Historic Trials in Red Fort, an account of a general court-martial and of Shah Nawaz, Saigal, and Dhillon, and also the European Military Commission report of the Red Fort by Bahadur Shah Zafar after the mutiny. The foreword of this book was, and Moti Ram included the report of Bahadur Shah Zafar's trial in the end. The foreword to this book was written by Nehru, which I will not get into too much detail, but Nehru actually writes in fair great details on this particular issue. This is, of course, after the fact. Once again, I want to point out that the vernacular press had already been talking about the importance of the Red Fort and drawn a direct connection with 1857. This is one link, I think, to be pursued of colonial trials in general. Speaking of trajectory, and I'm being mindful of the time because I know I have 20 minutes and I want to make all the points I want to make. One is to understand colonial trials as a continuum. 1857, of course, is one kind of a trial which had raised a question of sovereignty. But of course, there had been a long line of colonial trials in between the 90 years and so on. One was, of course, the Alipur bomb case in Calcutta, highly important case where Chittaranjan Das, who would be a major figure of the 1920s, acted as a lawyer. The conspiracy cases of Kapodi and Meerut in the United Provinces, and of course the trials of famous anti-colonial leaders, Tilak, Gandhi, and so on. The populace was not unaware of these. These were well within the popular memory of many of the people living in that period. But for some, this is where we need to understand the public response more closely. One is, on the one hand, I have seen the INA trials comparison being made directly to the 1857 war and these other trials. The reason is simple. I think people understood that something of proportions of sovereignty and movement is happening. The understanding that a new era may begin is very clear in this period. This is one point I want to make. The second one, of course, is that just before this is a picture from the rally from 15th November 1945, the day the INA trial was slated to begin. Hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands of people walked in processions through Calcutta, chanting Azad Hind Zindabad, Jai Hind, and Delhi Chalo. The crowds took many by surprise. The city had not seen such popular participation since the Quit India movement. The procession culminated in multiple city squares, the largest gathering being in Shraddhananda Park in the heart of the city, where a creation of a public fund was announced amid great acclaim. This is the picture of that rally. The sole speaker was Syed Nausher Ali, the Speaker of the Bengal Legislative Assembly, who narrated the history of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and his army, emphasizing that the INA was by no means a Japanese puppet. but the armed instrument of an independent, Shadhin government of Free India. The INA had almost purified, quote, the poisonous air of communalism and cleared the path for national unity. Arguments in defense of the INA were aired in the public sphere even before the trial had commenced. Naushad Ali followed a line of reasoning that Bhulabhai Desai later made in the courtroom. Churchill's pledge, and this is a quote, Churchill's pledge to continue fighting Hitler from America or other parts of the world in case England fell to the Nazis was a mark of patriotism. How was Netaji's struggle any different? Um, Again, I think that this is very clear. I mentioned this because this argument about the INA not being simply a puppet, a twisting Hollywood, comes very early on, a recognition of sovereignty, much before Bhulabhai makes this argument, not before late November, as I understand, and more in detail much later. Already he is aware of this. This is part of a broader popular discourse. I give you only one example, even before the trial began. There are more iterations that continue afterwards. Um, During the war, most Indian politicians had kept at best a cautious distance from Subhash Chandra Bose's overseas activities, not least due to the threat of wartime censorship. But on the eve of the trials, the Bengal Congress had no qualms about recognizing what they saw as the climax of a long national rebellion. If patriotism is a crime, Naushad Ali said, then every Indian is guilty of that crime, and punishing even one member of the Indian National Army is to punish every Indian. If you really go into the courtroom accounts, soon you will see that there was an adjournment for a few years. The trial commenced later in November. As soon as it did, you did have a very sudden, student protests all over Calcutta. This has not been given enough attention in the historiography, I think. But the protests were throughout the trial. The resistance was stiff. On November 21st, the day the court reconvened, students of numerous schools and colleges boycotted their classes and gathered in Wellington Square to celebrate Azad Hind Day. And these are, those of you know Calcutta, these are really central spaces in the city of Calcutta. Around 3 in the afternoon, they began marching around Dharmatola Street towards the city of Esplanade, waving the national flag and photographs of Netaji, chanting slogans of Release Azad Hind Fauj and Quit India. They tried to enter Dalhousie Square, the city's central business and administrative district, but the police stopped them from entering a prohibited area. Students sat down. When they tried to proceed again around 6 p.m., the police showed no more mercy. They started indiscriminate lathi charge, and policemen mounted on horseback and charged into the gathering. When a Sikh student trying to proceed with the national flag was promptly beaten and arrested, the students retreated and began exchanging stones and brickbats. Soon, rounds of firing from revolvers were heard. Around 60 students were rushed to the hospital, and initially only one was reported dead. Next year, you can see the number has gone up to 13 killed and 125 injured. Suddenly, they called a strike. Calcutta became a ghost town. All shops, offices, movie theaters, and share market, even the share market, this is my contribution to the capital question, I guess, was shut down. People set fire to one police motorbike and about 25 military and police vehicles. Such a huge and all-encompassing hartal, wrote the Anandabajar Putrika, is rare in the history of the city of Calcutta.
Aniket, you have a couple of minutes to wrap up, okay?
Yes, yeah. I think I will wrap up with the final image. It was slowly becoming clear to the British, even in the early stages of the trial, that they could not follow the usual script of explaining away this anger and violence as riots, as was nature, since all communities seemed united here. Note that at this point, none of the major political parties had come out in open support of those who agitated. Vallabhbhai Patel even rebuked the students for wasting their energy in petty fights against the police and advised them to prepare for the upcoming provincial elections. So you see where the party loyalties lie in this period. This was much more of a spontaneous movement. Those on the streets showed a complete rejection of the colonial state with all its traditional laws and military strength, and renewal of the old spirit of anti-colonialism. This spirit was clearer in the city of Amritsar, where on the same day hundreds of students marched to gather at the grounds of Jallianwala Bagh, where the colonial state had once shed all pretensions. It was in Jallianwala Bagh that the protests happened, so that was the cognate, so to speak, of Calcutta in Amritsar. And of course, in Calcutta, the corpses of the 7 students were placed next to the memorial of Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das. That is where you see the same defender in the Alipur bomb trials and a lot more, recognizing them as part of the long lineage of anti-colonial martyrs of the region. And this was a huge processions, led by Sharat Chandra Bose were entered, and this was entirely, a thing. My whole point here is even before the military court had begun its deliberation, the streets of India had plunged headlong into what would be called the last war of independence. Where does this leave us? I would offer just 2 things on reflection and then discuss more with you. One is to appreciate the central role of spatial memory and spatiality in all of this. I found out, I did not know, I saw Shah Nawaz Khan is buried just across the Red Fort under the steps of the Jama Masjid. Abul Kalam Azad's grave is much more decorative, but he and his wife are all buried there. So the memory remains very, very strong spatially here. And secondly, is to really inquire how best. I mean, this I've offered mostly evidence to problematize than a concrete argument. But it's an opportunity to reflect on how we understand the relationship of law beyond and within the courtroom in this period. At best, I can certainly say it's not unidirectional from the courtroom outside. It is at the very least a dialectical process, which becomes more and more common later. And this has, repercussions in how we understand the role of judicial processes and popular politics later. So that's the trajectory I would like to end on. I hope I'm on time and then, take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aniket. And you've made a couple of important points about spatiality, the place where the trial was held, and also about temporality. That much of the arguments that Vallabhbhai Desai eventually made inside the courtroom in December of 1945 were already being articulated in the streets in November 1945. And I think you're right that, the trial convened initially on the 5th of November, but there was an adjournment. And a full advantage was taken of that fortnight's adjournment. And it was in that period that all of the nationalist newspapers, published the stories of the saga of the Indian National Army. We'll come back to a more robust discussion of your paper in a little while. But I would first like to invite Shormishtha Shah, Assistant Professor at IIT Bombay, to present her paper. Shormishtha is an Assistant Professor of Performance Studies at IIT Bombay, and she holds a PhD from Freie Universität Berlin. She authored Theatre and National Identity in Colonial India, published in 2017, and co-edited Performance Making and the Archive in 2022. She's a theatre director and has produced works like Playing to Bombay and participated in the Venice Biennale 2024. As a Fulbright Nehru Research Fellow at NYU, she is conducting research on community identity, which will be turned into a book. Today, she'll be speaking to us on the communist era, living the everyday in times of struggle, the case of the Indian People's Theatre Association's Central Squad. Professor Shah.
So thank you so much, Professor Bose and Robert, for inviting me for this very, very important conference on the 1940s and, the very important historical moments that it created. My presentation today is actually a part of a book, the book that Professor Bose already mentioned, Theatre and National Identity in Colonial India. Without wasting time, because it's actually culled out of a book, so now I had to really put together the arguments, the most important arguments that I want to, take you through in this paper. So I will begin this paper with the summary of a play written by Jolly Call, a member of an organization called this Youth Cultural Institute, which was a performance collective that was formed in the Calcutta University around the Second World War. The play called Politicians Take to Rowing performed at the Ashutosh Hall in Calcutta is representative of the cultural activities of the educated youth of Calcutta of this period. Youth Cultural Institute, YCI, was one of the precursors of the Indian People's Theatre Association, IPTA, the cultural wing of the Communist Party of India. Jolly Call, in a memoir written about the Youth Cultural Institute and published in the theatre magazine Bahurupi in 1969, writes that what she aimed at through the play was to reach out to a larger community of the Indian people and highlight the hypocrisy and confusion around the political situation of the time. In the play, Politicians Take to Rowing, a farce on the political climate of this period, a notice is sent to the Führer Hitler from India about a rowing challenge amongst 4 representative countries. The Führer Hitler has no idea about how to row. He discusses his problem with Benito Mussolini. They come to the conclusion that rowing is something practiced by the decadent students of Oxford and Cambridge. However, he could not refuse the challenge because that would mean that his Aryan culture lacks something. So he calls upon Joseph Goebbels to order a truce with England because England knew rowing and they could teach the Germans. Goebbels was to take this message to Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom at the time. However, he had to explain to Churchill that it was because of the Jews that the Germans forgot rowing. Meanwhile, Goebbels practices the sport and all of them meet for a competition. Lord Linlithgow, the then Viceroy of India, becomes the moderator. The representatives from India who come to the rowing competition are Chakravarti Rajagopalachari, a leader of the Indian National Congress in the Madras Presidency. Lord Linlithgow introduced him as, in the play, he is the only member of the working committee who is working seriously for a compromise, unquote, from the play. The next was Mahatma Gandhi, who was introduced by Linlithgow as a saint politician, and that he has had, again a quote from the play, several talks with him already in which we have both understood each other perfectly, but not arrived at any settlement, unquote. The next is Subhas Bose, the Congress President of All India Forward Bloc. The next one is Mr. Again, these are quotes from the play itself, Mr. Hindu Mahasabha Savarkar, and finally Jinnah, whom Viceroy Linlithgow introduces as the one who has, and I quote, who has devised a brilliant scheme to keep India under the British as a dominion, unquote. However, even before the competition could start, chaos begins when Adolf Hitler declares himself as the leader of his team. Churchill clearly has a problem with that. Mussolini takes Hitler's side, but the debate remains unresolved. On the other hand, in the Indian side, while Rajagopalachari begins with a compromise, Subhash Bose says the essential thing was leadership, and he would make the compromise if he was made the leader. Savarkar goes on to argue, and I quote, our ancient munis and rishis could have won this race by pure spiritual power. We Hindus have no unity amongst ourselves. That is the cause of our downfall, and we have actually gone and included a Muslim in our crew, unquote. While Jinnah argues for minority reservation and wants 50% Muslim representation in rowing, although Linlithgow tries to intervene and says, and I quote from the play, you must never agree together, but you must have perfect unity amongst yourselves, unquote. The Indian representatives become quiet when Mahatma Gandhi threatens them with a hunger strike. The farce remains unresolved. The author, Jolly Call, an active woman member of the cultural movement of the Calcutta University, leaves several questions open. that a sport could become the motivation for a political union turned the entire contemporary political scenario into a ridiculous situation where no one had an idea about the purpose of what was being done, neither the Indian side nor the European. The question of the purpose, the reason for why the fight, is ridiculed not only within the national context, as it were, but also the international one. This question continued to haunt the cultural movements of the time that were focused on the freedom struggle of India until the Bengal famine in the early 1940s became a decisive moment for political cultural mobilization. Ali Sardar Jafri, the Urdu author and poet, who was also a member of the Communist Party of India, recalls the Progressive Writers Association movement, which took inspiration from Iqbal's tremendous line, Utho meri duniya ke garibo ko jaga do, arise and wake the poor of my world, had a wide spectrum. He remembers Sajjad Jahir was a communist, Premchand was a Gandhian. He tells Iqbal Masood in an interview for Indian Express in 1992. But the common rallying point was the freedom movement. Under similar circumstances was formed the Youth Cultural Institute in Calcutta. Initially, some students of the Calcutta University at the end of 1939 planned to organize a research group for popularizing various socio-economic and political problems of different countries. When this could not materialize amongst the group, some students on their own accord wrote and staged dramas in English, especially for performance before the members of the Calcutta University Rowing Club. Inspired by the popularity of their work, they contemplated a permanent cultural movement on the lines of the Progressive Writers Association. Progressive Writers Association, along with YCI, Youth Cultural Institute, became the forerunner of the IPTA movement, as I have mentioned earlier. The formation of the IPTA was formally declared in the first All India Conference of the Communist Party of India after the ban on it by the colonial government was lifted as a result of the CPI's support to the Allied group, whose part was Britain in the Second World War. The work of such cultural squads was being supported by the left in India since the early 1940s. 1943-44 was also a period when the whole of Bengal presidency was hit by one of the worst famines that the region had ever seen. The horror of death in the streets of Calcutta forced people to act, demanding a right to live and a total retreat of the colonial government, which allowed this to happen. It became necessary to unveil the inhuman attitude of the colonial government, which failed to treat its colonial subject at par with its subjects in England. Sunil Jana's photographs of the corpses being sniffed and eaten by dogs piled on the banks of ponds lying in the fields brought this reality to the people. An instance of which one could experience at Wellington Square in Calcutta. Janul Abidin's, Shomnath Hore's, and Chittaprasad's paintings similarly visually narrated the stories of death. Rekha Jain, who was a member of the IPTA, recollects her experience in a memoir on how she joined the cultural movement in order to mobilize people and collect funds for famine relief. And I'm quoting her, when in 1943 we reached there in Calcutta, the whole of Bengal was in the clasp of famine. Beggars, who were essentially farmers, would come out from here and there, and their voices saying, "Pandao, mago pandao, give us some rice starch," would resonate from all directions. One in hunger would take one's last breath on the platform of the streets. A strange smell would float in the air, making one anxious. The experiences that many have had with those who were famine-stricken were even more heartrending. During this time, when the intellectuals of the Friends of Soviet Union, an organization that was formed on the initiative of the Communist International in 1927, would meet at the office, their main concern would be how to give some relief to the famine-stricken. What program could be adopted such that enough funds could be collected? I met a lot of writers, singers, actors to discuss this crisis. When this group would move across various localities singing songs, I saw men and women would collect to listen to our songs in the streets, in the galleries of the houses, and throw bundles of rice, pulses, money in our jhola. It was during this time that some friends prepared a dance called Bhoka Bangal. or Hungry Bengal, and a play in Bengali called Joban Bondi. This dance and drama used to affect the audience so deeply that they would contribute very generously. A lot of money was collected. In view of the dreadfulness of the famine, this feeling was not enough. Therefore, for the experience of these performances, it was decided that such performances should be organized even outside Calcutta so that the people of other regions also have some impression of the destruction of the Bengal famine, and thus money could be collected. Unquote. It was in view of the success of Bhuka Bengal and Joban Bondi, which was translated to Hindi and named Antim Avilasha, the last wish. There are anecdotes which say these performances collected more than 1 lakh rupees only in Punjab during this time. And the performances of the Bengal squad invited to Bombay in mid 1944 to collect money for famine relief, that Puran Chandra Joshi, the General Secretary of the CPI during this period, decided to initiate a cultural process that would mobilize political action of the masses. He was of the belief that cultural programs of the squads, political mobilization was possible in ways that through cultural programs of the squads, political mobilization was possible in ways that the movement had not seen before. However, he mentions in a memoir on Balraj Sahni that although these performances had vigor and had opened up new horizons, what they inevitably suffered from was amateurishness. He writes about the IPTA, and I quote, "What made the IPTA really well known then and famous later was their choir of patriotic songs from all the languages of India, together with folk songs with a social content and moving tunes. We have deliberately adopted the policy of young left intellectuals with cultural talent to learn, perform, and popularize the folk heritage of the various parts of our vast and ancient land." Unquote. On June 1st, 1943, the formation of the IPTA was declared at the first National Conference of the Communist Party of India. But the central squad of the IPTA came into existence a little later when a group of performers of the IPTA Bengal squad came to perform at Bombay to collect money for the Bengal famine. It was rather on the request of some of the members of the Communist Party of India and some performers from the Indian ballet dancer Uday Shankar's troupe that the central squad was founded. According to P.C. Joshi, it was to achieve more professional expertise in the cultural work for freedom, not only from the British but also from various societal norms within the wider panorama of world politics, that the central squad was started. The congregation that created the IPTA central squad hence comprised many experts in dance, music, etc., who did not necessarily agree with the ideological inclinations of the Communist Party, but agreed to join the central squad on the grounds that the group had already acquired some name in its work for the nation and also substantially contributed to the anti-colonial movement. After the formation of the IPTA Central Cultural Squad, a commune in a Gandhian ashram with pluses, and this is what P.C. Joshi says about the commune, was set up at Andheri in present-day Mumbai. The performers were going to live as well as rehearse here. Preeti Banerjee, a lead singer of the central squad, in an interview notes, "Before this, we had done different kind of work outside. We were not used to staying inside the house and practicing for hours. Joshi had told us then, now your true work is to play the tanpura and devote your time to riyaz and rehearsing your steps." Unquote. The riyaz or rehearsal was not only for a good show, but as P.C. Joshi would put it, for them it was also true work, which is Desher Kaj, or work for the nation. This system of belief led them to overlook difficulties they faced in living in the commune. The word commune immediately emits several connotations. It suggests a community, the common, or even communism. Its historical significance lies in the way the idea of the commune has been implemented with political intent. The commune has been seen as that which dissolves the nation state, but at the same time as lacking statist capacities. Functionally, its ability to overturn that which is normative makes the idea of the commune appealing. However, this revolutionary character of the commune is only relevant in conjuncture, for example, in case of the Paris Commune. So then, what exactly is a commune? Is it when a group of people consciously live together? Karl Marx explains otherwise. In Grundriss' Foundations of the Critique of Political Economy, he asserts that forms of social life that may appear quintessentially irreparably divided and individuated are actually communal. Hence, for him, the process of a commune might not involve an act insofar as an act could be understood as an action consciously taken forward by an agent, but rather he identifies the original commune in the Asiatic, ancient Germanic, and Slavonic forms as pre-capitalist mode of living. He discusses it in terms of social relations of kinship, clan, where it comes to exist as a result of the communality of blood, language, and customs. The commune comes to represent itself subjectively as a unity in which propriety rights residue. In this form of commune, according to him, surplus labor performed predominantly as communal land is pre-appropriated by the entire clan. This sort of a commune and related forms of subsistence have often been called primitive communism. On the other hand, talking about Paris Commune, Marx talks about self-government. It is the people acting for itself by itself, he says. If we consider the everyday life of the IPTA Central Squad performers in the commune, we find a similar form of self-governance at its core, which was driven by artistic labor or desher kaj work for the nation. It is in the context of how a certain lifestyle of living in a commune becomes a belief system that the suffix ist has been added to the word commune here. It needs to be highlighted here that the suffix ist is often used to signify a certain adherent of a belief system, practice, ideology, etc. The rituals of every day were carefully choreographed in order to meet not only the needs of the performances, but also to create national subjects as the nation was still being defined. The entire process was voluntary. The banalities of life gained significance in order to establish the significance of not only what was being done as having importance in national life, but also to purge theatre and dance of the prejudices that were attached to them, mainly within the middle-class urban population. The details of every day were linked to ethical issues of social worth. For the first time in India, livelihood associated to the performing arts was not only a caste profession or a profession to look down upon. In fact, given its ideological worth, it ceased to be a mode of livelihood at all and became purely ideological, aesthetic, political action. It was in the manner of the Gandhian ashram that life was being performed in order to create democratized spheres of public interaction, especially against colonial government. Hence, when Rajani Palmdutt, a British communist, visited the commune and called it primitive, he seems to borrow from Marx, yet it contradicted the space of artistic modernism that the commune became. The slide 10 is one of the only available images of the performers of the Central Squad, and I have been able to collect it from Rajani Palmdutt's archive, which is with the British Library at the moment. Gulbardhan, talking about one of the performers here, Gulbardhan remembers this period from the commune. Our first class would begin at 7 o'clock in the morning. We would exercise till 9 o'clock and then break for an hour for breakfast and cleaning the house. From 10 to 1, we would again practice till lunch break. In the afternoon, from 4 o'clock after tea, we learned new movements and practiced compositions. We would break for tea again at 6 for half an hour and then continue till 9 or 10 at night. In a sense, our routine was fixed by the kitchen bell, unquote. The members would often sit back after the rehearsals were over at night to help in making of costumes or other accessories necessary for the performances. The participation of many in the IPTA and its Central Squad was not due to their affiliation with the Communist Party of India, but was due to its revolutionary spirit. Therefore, many of the performers were not members of the Communist Party, although they were part of the IPTA. This revolutionary spirit was maintained through the content of the performances, which was decided in consultation with the General Secretary of the Communist Party, P.C. Joshi himself. There would be regular party classes or classes on the ideology or political position of the Communist Party at the squad, and members of the central squad would be invited for important meetings of the party. But not everybody was uncritical about these classes, as Ravi Shankar maintains, who was a member of the IPTA central squad, maintains in his autobiography Rag Anurag. Life at the commune was very different from the kind of life most of the members of the central squad had before coming to the commune. Especially in the accounts of the women, those 2-3 years persistently emerge in the form of nostalgia for the strength that the movement of IPTA central squad held, that of revolution, of a socio-cultural kind. Although in terms of everyday life within the commune, there was a huge shift of gender roles from normative heterosexual parameters, but nevertheless, neither was there any role reversal or dissolution of normatives entirely, nor was there a political will to address gender roles as such. Because of lack of time, I'll quickly skip over and talk about something, a little bit about the performances themselves that of the central squad. Yeah, just okay. IPT's central squad had set out to form a national community through the use of the narratives of real, fictional, linear, tabloidesque, paradoxical understandings of history. Right. Due to lack of time, I cannot talk about it in more detail. The efficacious objectives of the central. So this is a front page tabloid of the People's War magazine, which was the mouth organ of the CPI. And if you actually look at these sketches, which are by Chitta Prasad, again published on some of them. That is published in the People's Age. This too. This is a front page again of the People of India, which we were talking about cosmopolitanism just a little while ago, and you see the image of the image is called, again drawn by Chitta Prasad. It's called For a Free India of Brother Peoples. You can see the image of a Vitruvian man with perfect symmetry, as it were. With women on the sides, and the destruction and the famine that happened in the 1940s. And on the other side, you see sketches of the central squad performances, which were again in the same tabloidesque form like you have seen of the People of India, published on the front pages of People's War magazine and also on People's Age. The efficacious objective of the central squad in the multiplicity of contextualities and ideologies driven both by nationalism and universalism at the same time did succeed in creating a huge support base among the people, which I have called communitas, borrowing from Victor Turner. But in itself, the troop of the central squad could not remain a community as a result of the very clashes that created a communitas for them. The communists, who once believed in the possibilities of such a space, slowly started getting disillusioned as a more concrete image of the nation appeared. This new image was not that of an alternative space, but rather a space free of any elements of difference to the British, the raison d'etre of their coming together. The proposal in post-independent India was to dissociate theatre from any specific political program and to rethink it comprehensively. And many of these people who were part of the central squad actually became part of government policies. A drama seminar in 1956 was organized, of which many of them were part. Hence, the communist air in colonial India that once held possibilities of questioning power in the form of performing banalities and living, or rather acting every day out while performance for an audience was rehearsed, was ultimately abandoned. In a new India, the commune was replaced by the nation itself that had already discovered itself, as it were. Thank you. And sorry about taking my time.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to bring the audience into the discussion as quickly as possible, and so I'll be brief in making my comments. I think with Aniket's paper, we have some insights into spatiality, and particularly the significance of the space in which the Red Fort trials were held in the winter of 1945-1946. I think Aniket has given us a good sense of that significance. I would simply add that the Red Fort was also used as a colonial prison. There were underground cells in the Red Fort. And in fact, when my father, Shishir Kumar Bose, was arrested, he was brought by aeroplane from Calcutta to Delhi and put up in one of the underground cells of the Red Fort for about 10 days before being transported by train to Lahore to be, a guest of the British at the Lahore Fort. And he has written in his memoirs that in that cell, somebody had carved on the wall, "Stone walls do not a prison make." The other point is about temporality, the relationship between the arguments being made inside the courtroom and beyond it. And I think we need to be, clear about the chronology. The trials opened on the 5th of November, but there was an adjournment, and it was in that interregnum that many of the huge demonstrations in the cities of Calcutta and Bombay took place. All the newspapers began to publish stories of the INA. And then, of course, the trial continued until the 31st of December. And Bhulabhai Desai made his major concluding speech in December. And the sentence of deportation for life, which was exactly the same as the one handed to Bahadur Shah Zafar, came on the 31st of December of 1945. And Claude Auchinleck had to deliberate very quickly. And as early as the 3rd of January, he announced that the Red Fort 3 were going to be released. So, there are these two different phases. You have the period of November and December with, I think, if, Aniket's argument is to be taken on board, the same argument that Bhulabhai Desai made in December was already being made in November in the public squares and in the mass meetings being held during the month of November. But there is a different phase that begins with the release of the Red Fort 3, because at that stage they become heroes and they travel all across India along with other important INA officers. So in January and February, the movement takes on a different texture. And that eventually leads on to the RIN mutiny, which takes place in February of 1946. So even that entire period of great tumult, and the period which actually witnessed a good bit of Hindu-Muslim-Sikh unity, has to be sort of periodized, November 1945 to February of 1946. And then after that, of course, the cabinet mission comes. And the issue, in some sense, changes from whether the British were going to quit India to when and how the British were going to leave India, and how, in fact, power was to be transferred. I should probably say a few words about the Red Fort 3, because I got to know them as I was growing up. Who were they? Shahnawaz Khan, he was from a Janjua Rajput family, and there were many members of his family who had served in the British Indian Army. Shahnawaz Khan himself fought in the Kohima and the Hakafalam sector, and he had with him Mehboob Ahmed, and he probably made, in some ways, the most eloquent statement before the Red Fort about loyalty. And he explained how he heard Netaji speak in Singapore in July of 1943. And he was moved, and he was almost hypnotized, he said. And he had to make a choice between king and country. And he chose country over his old familial loyalty to the king. Now, Shahnawaz wrote a book in the late 1940s, The INA and its Netaji. And it's coming out in a new edition. It was out of print for a very long time, and I've written the new foreword to it. The classic edition, of course, had Jawaharlal Nehru's foreword, who described the Red Fort trial as a contest between Britain and India. Prem Kumar Sahgal, again, was also from Punjab. All three were from Punjab. And Prem Kumar Sahgal, I got to know really well. He was Netaji's military secretary. And during the Battle of Imphal, he was with Netaji for much of the time in Memio. And he has written beautiful accounts of how they would talk about many issues of the day. And Prem Sahgal's conclusion was that if Netaji had not been born in a slave country, as he put it, he would have been the greatest teacher of his times, based on the conversations that they used to have together. And then, of course, in 1945, Prem Sahgal went to fight, a last battle at Mount Popa. And and he has, again, sort of a beautiful description that as Prem Sahgal was taking his leave, Netaji had tears flowing down his cheek. And Prem Sahgal said that I was trying to reassure him, Netaji, nothing will happen to me, and so forth. And he later became the chairman of the Netaji Research Bureau in the 1980s and early 1990s until he passed away. And so he contributed also to the recording of the history of the 1940s. Gulbaksh Singh Dhillon was probably the most colorful of all three of these characters. He would, recite Urdu Shairi and, patriotic poetry and sing the INA songs and so forth. When I met him, the first time that I encountered him in 1973, he was busy writing a paper called The Nehru Holds the Irrawaddy. He was commanding the Nehru Brigade, and he was trying to stop Slim's British army from crossing the Irrawaddy River. And when I went that the time had come to present his paper, he hadn't finished drawing his last map. So he asked me to go away. And then he was forever remorseful. And that's why whenever he met me, I used to get a bear hug. How could I have shouted at you, Shugato, he would say. But he was very, very keen to make sure that even, all of the small battles that were fought between 1943 and 1945 were recorded because, the British are very good at writing their version of military histories. And that's why it was important for many of these INA officers to actually record what had happened. So these were the kinds of people that were involved, and because the first Red Fort Three were Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh, it was a classic era of decision, of judgment by the British, which helped the nationalist movement to build, in some ways, a spectacular unity in the winter of 1945-46. And it is a deep tragedy that, of course, this unity did not hold. And there was, in many ways, a crisis of leadership. And the man who had united them by promising equality was not on the scene. Now, in terms of, I think the most important contribution that Shormisha Shah is making is to actually give us a sense of the quotidian life, in the Central Scod, in the commune. And even though there was some theoretical discussion of Marx and what commune meant, that rich texture, that rich detail is what I think is the most valuable part of what you are offering. But I think it's, in some ways, we need to place this into some context because, as you mentioned, the Communist Party of India changed its line after the German invasion of the Soviet Union, and the imperialist war became a people's war. The Communist Party of India, the ban on it by the British government was lifted. And so, post-war, I think even though there were instances of the tricolour and the green flag of the Muslim League and the red flag of the communists being tied together and flown, there was some real difficulty because the CPI had not supported either the Quit India movement or the Azad Hind movement abroad. And when it comes to the famine, what is, of course, quite fascinating is that, at that stage, the Indian National Congress leadership and their major activists were all locked away for having taken part in the Quit India movement. In fact, those who were the followers of Subhash Chandra Bose had been locked away even earlier, from 1940 onwards. And it was only by going on a hunger strike that he himself got released and went abroad to raise an army of liberation. But I think it is important to also try and figure out, if we are studying the 1940s, who else could operate, both in the cultural and political sphere, when the nationalists had been imprisoned in that particular period. What one finds is that in the cultural sphere, in addition to, of course, Somnath Hor and Jainul Abidin and Chitta Prasad, who continued to sketch the famine all the way up to 1947 as the British were leaving, there were those who were artists based in Shantiniketan who were also portraying the famine. Of course, there was Nandulal Bose. I showed yesterday the image of his Annapurna and Rudra, where Shiva is reduced to a skeleton holding a begging bowl. Ramkinkar Bej, his sculptures and his paintings are absolutely brilliant, depicting the human tragedy of the famine. So there was the Shantiniketan group who were also contributing to the cultural representation of a huge human tragedy, which finally undermined what legitimacy might have remained of the British Raj in India. But there were also, if you think about it, in Bengal, the communists and its cultural arm, the IPTA, were free to operate. The other group that was carrying out some degree of famine relief, because there was no official government relief, was in fact the more progressive faction of the Muslim League. The conservative faction was headed by Khwaja Nazimuddin, but there was a progressive faction which was being led by Abul Hashim in that period, and they too were being active. And what happened, of course, was that when it came to the 1945-46 elections, it was that segment of the Muslim League which, in fact, did well in the elections that were held in late 1945 and then at the provincial level in 1946, and therefore that contributed to the kind of politics that eventually led to the partition and the creation of Pakistan. But one final thought that I would leave with you, and I don't want you to respond immediately because I want to take a couple of questions and then get Aniket and you to respond to whatever I may have said, and also taking the questions together for reasons of time. But one question that has always sort of kind of intrigued me, since you've talked about the commune, there was always, I think, from the very beginning, some tension between individual creativity and the collective. There were so many of the musicians, the singers, the artists who joined or were affiliated with the IPTA, who had some real difficulty then or soon in the near future with the discipline sought to be imposed. So, perhaps you could say a little bit about the interplay of individual creativity in a setting where you had to live together in the commune and, follow party discipline and so on. I will pause here, but instead of just to begin to hear your voices, let me take a couple of questions before giving the first round of responses to the speakers. Yes, Sebastian.
I'm very unfortunately, I will have to leave, so I turn it into a comment. So the idea to Shamishta, actually, the idea of the commune and the longing for the commune is actually something that I think is a very important unrealized trajectory that you have. So in the way that I would think about it, the most consequential commune in that way in the 1940s is actually Maududi's Jamaat-e-Islami. And what many people in India don't know is that when the communist movement in Pakistan collapsed in the late 1970s, a major part of the rank and file of the communist movement actually went over to the Jamaat-e-Islami. So I would like you to think about whether this is actually signifying the depth of this longing for the commune, which is not really realized in the communist movement in India afterwards, basically, not even in Pakistan, by the way. No, so there is possibly a longing for the idea of the commune that has been lost in the process of becoming a political party, in the same way that it has been for various other, commune-style experiments that were happening in the mid-1920s.
Is there another question, perhaps for Aniket? Okay, for the moment, I'll take yours and Mujib's and then give a response. I'll come to you in a second round. Yeah.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Abhisha Gulati, and I am an incoming student in social and cultural psychology at the London School of Economics. And that is why my question is slightly related to social and cultural psychology. So you talked about you also showed pictures of the British press and how INA trials were both spatially represented and also represented in the media. What do you think would be the influence of the language we use to communicate history or communicate particularly in the context of INA trials, but also like other South Asian incidents and situations? How does that language influence the way that incident or that situation gets socially represented? And also I also have a question to you, which is that you talked about commune, and Professor Bose also talked about contextualizing the idea in the present day. So, if you could elaborate how theatre could be used to contextualize the idea of commune in today's day and age, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Let's take Mujib's question and or comment, and then let's have Aniket and Sharmishta respond.
I have a question for Aniket, but also I want to entice some comment from you on one of the cases. In a presentation you talked about various trials, Kakori and the INA. Somehow that we have the perception that INA stands out as a very distinct case of trial for a variety of reasons, and one among them is this nationalist India's anti-colonial movement was far stronger on the legal resources and the political consciousness in general in the wider context of World War II, and all of that was very different. The environment was very different. So I was wondering can we draw some specific distinction among these three and how INA stands out? This spills over to Professor Bose's comment with respect to Sahnawaz. There is this gentleman Sahnawaz, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted Sahnawaz to go to Pakistan, but he decided to stay back in India, primarily because Nehru supported him in the INA trial and subsequently had a political career, fighting, becoming the minister in Nehru's cabinet, and and then from Meerut, fighting elections and all of that. So my question is this: have you ever had a chance? You must have interacted with Sahnawaz as well. And why is it? But then he supported emergency, Indira Gandhi and all of it. Why did he support a man of that kind supporting emergency? It was a very interesting turnaround that I noticed. Thank you.
Aniket, will you respond first and then?
Yes, sure. Thank you. I think Professor Bose, thank you for the comments as always, and they are well taken. I am not responding too much in detail. I think the periodization point especially is very important for me. I think I am the reason I harped so much on the month-to-month basis is it was mostly a methodological one, is to understand there are a lot of post-colonial histories of law being written that see post-colonial constitutionalism and so on shaping the public. And I'm slightly skeptical of such accounts. So I'm trying to see what resources can the colonial period offer to offer a different kind of periodization and so on. But so that is why that point is quite crucial. To the two questions, thank you. I think for the first question, language and images are really important. The pictures I showed, to be clear, were also the nationalist press in the English language, but they were run by Indians. The English language press was very different. But I agree to your point that the language being used, and that is something I would delve much more on. It's clear that I don't see the word riot used very much in this context at all, which previously the British were open to using for a broad range of things. Of course, another word that becomes very important in this context is sedition, and that's a whole different question altogether. Is this sedition or is this war between two sovereign nations? The sovereign governments at any rate. And so I think these are the questions to work on. To reply to Dr. Rahman's question, I think there are similarities. I really think the explosion of sovereignty, so to speak, during the Second World War and the fundamental shifts brought about where where an entire army was raised to fight the British army does, at least in my understanding for now, make this trial stand apart from previous revolutionary trials. Again, going back to the sovereignty question, previously what was seen as an aspiration alone is much more an enacted form in this case. And that is why it's seen not just as a case of simple court-martialing a few soldiers. It's much more than that. Much more clear, of course, with the revolt of the Navy in the next year too. That's my quick, sharp response to this. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your comments and also the few questions that I have received. Your comments are very, very well taken. It's absolutely important that we keep in mind the context within which, at least, when we talk about cultural movements that are appearing during this period. I, of course, am talking about a very specific movement, which is the IPTA Central Squad, because IPTA itself was a very, very big cultural movement. It had its own regional formations, and some of them continue to this date. Maybe not as active as before, but they do. Having said that, when it comes to, I must also admit that my work is not necessarily an exhaustive historical account of cultural elements that have emerged around the famine as such, but it looks at how what I call in my book is that I've looked at moments as citations from history where national identity emerge within certain cities in India. For example, I look at the Bombay Presidency, particularly Bombay City, and how English theatre emerges there, and national identity becomes very key in English theatre performances. Then I move to IPTA Central Squad, and I also talk about another moment of the Swadishi Jatra with Mukunda Das, and again how national identity plays out as a very important key factor in those performances. So that's how my project really moves, rather than becoming an exhaustive historical work on famine as such. I completely see the point that you're trying to make about individual creativity versus the collective, and I mean, I immediately can think about Riti Ghatuk's book that he had written on the cultural front, where he is talking about how the party needs to party and creative work needs to dissociate each other from not be so tightly knit, because it becomes very difficult to do creative work. So yeah, that element of individual freedom is absolutely key in creative work. Having said that, recently I went for this exhibition at MoMA in London, which was on the Bauhaus movement. And if you actually look historically on at how collectives have been able to do in terms of art and artistic practice, then you realize that collective formations often actually enable creative process as well, as much as they might seem limiting. And given that I come primarily from performance and a theatre practice background as well, I'll start with your question, which was on theatre functioning and the idea of the commune. So theatre happens to be a very collective form of art. It is in India, even in its most modernist form, it has always functioned in terms of groups. So an individual theatre makers, especially men, directors, male directors, have been extremely important in the theatre scenario in India. Very few women directors have been able to kind of make the mark male directors and playwrights have been able to make. That, of course, comes from the context we live, social context we live in. The fact that, which is something that we also see within the central squad, that women were often relegated to jobs of taking care of the group. So we have seen women as always running a group as managers almost, but groups have been very, very key, have played a very, very key role in theatre making process. However, that's not the same as the commune. A commune would also mean a form of living together, which often is not the case, although sometimes it could be the case. There was the comment on Marx. I actually, so Marx comes up because Rajani Palmdat actually borrows from Marx and says this is primitive communism, which I actually disagree with that. It was, in fact, the kind of artistic work that came out of the central squad is quite impressive. It actually borrows from Uday Shankar's repertoire and then builds on that. Central squad becomes the premise for Indian dance and theatre, also ballet. Indian ballet is, modernist, that key moment. So I think that's that. Therefore, that commune is very, very important. Of course, the central squad commune did not emerge out of the blue. It had a context. There was, of course, Gandhian ashrams and Jamaat-e-Islami, of course, having their communes. In fact, P.C. Joshi I mentioned called the commune the Gandhian ashram with pluses. So so there is this huge context within which the central squad kind of existed.
We are actually out of time for this panel, but I promised to take that one question there. So let me do that, and I'll answer Mujib's question as I wrap up.
Hi, I am Jitendra. I am doing PhD in JNU. So thanks, Aniket, for such a nice presentation. I really enjoyed this presentation, especially the speciality of the trial, as also highlighted by Professor Bose. So my question is about the sources that you used, vernacular archives. So what is the vernacular archives related to this trial? Is this like sources other than the papers of judicial proceedings, like all the papers except the papers of judicial proceedings? Like, what is the specific sources of this vernacular archives related to this trial? Thank you.
Thank you. I basically meant the newspapers. I should have said vernacular press archives, to be more precise. The most of the things I read to you were from publications in Bengali papers, two in particular, Jugantor and Bazar Putrika. This is where I found the most extensive coverage. Hindustan Standard too is part of the ABP family and was their English publication back then. That is what I meant. But also, I think we can extend the term a little bigger to pamphlets written in the same period, and also photographs and so on. But for the purpose of this presentation, it's newspapers.
Okay. Now, as we go through the day, I hope we can have conversations across the panels. So those of you who may not have had an opportunity to ask a question now, please feel free to do so, after the presentations, say in the second panel, because they are all connected. Before I conclude, I think I owe Mujib an answer to the question. I think, by and large, what happened was that the INA officers and soldiers who, happened to be on the other side of the partition line went to Pakistan, and there were others who sort of remained in India. Shahnawaz Khan was, one of the rare INA officers who actually came from a region, Rawalpindi, which was in Pakistan, who chose to stay here. Of course, there were other very prominent Indian Muslims in the Azad Hind movement, say Abid Hassan, who was Netaji's sole companion on his submarine voyage. But he came from Hyderabad, Deccan, and later joined the Indian Foreign Service and so on. But I would recommend that you read the memoir of the most top-ranking of the INA officers, Muhammad Zaman Kiani. And he is actually somewhat critical of Shahnawaz for getting co-opted by the Congress, during and after the INA trials. No one else really allowed himself or herself to be, co-opted in that way. Not Prem Kumar Saigal, not Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon, of the two others of the Red Fort Three. In fact, to be quite honest, I became much closer. They became almost members of our family with certainly Abid Hassan, but also Saigal and Dhillon. I did encounter Shahnawaz Khan several times, but those were mostly in sort of official gatherings of the late 1960s and early 1970s. He got much more involved with government pensions to INA veterans and things of that sort. So he used to come to Netaji Bhavan in Calcutta, and he and my father would go through the records of people to see whether they had been actively participating in the Indian National Army and so on. And of course, it was unfortunate that Shahnawaz chose to, support the emergency. He was in Nehru's government and then in Indira Gandhi's government. But in a sense, he was a bit of an outlier. And in that respect. Now, that does not take away anything from the bravery with which he fought in Kohima in Nagaland during the Second World War. So that's basically the story. There were different kinds of political choices that people made post-independence, but some did not have a real choice. Most of the figures in the Indian National Army had not wanted, the kind of partition ostensibly along religious lines that took place. And most of them, whom I got to know on both sides of the border, I'm still in touch with the INA families in Pakistan, their descendants. And they have, always been in favor of better subcontinental relations. They have never quite given up the spirit of the INA or that moment of the INA trials that Aniket described for us on this first panel. So thank you very much. We'll take a 15-minute coffee break now and reconvene for the second panel. Thank you.